It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. Appreciate those of you who are riding with us this morning. Glad to have you. You know, for the record, by the way, the folks over at Patriot FB are reloading some servers, so they'll be offline this morning. But we'll still be streaming, of course, on our website at americasvoicenow.org. I see a ton of you folks out there capturing the program live. I'm looking at here at Lincoln. I'm looking at Enos. I think Enos is in Texas, or Ennis. Fort Walton Beach, Mount Repose. I'm not quite sure where that is. Clarksville. Let's see. Chesterfield, Festus. I think that's Festus, Missouri. Morrilton. Don't know where all those places are. I see Seattle. I see Spokane. I see Virginia, Chicago. So thank you folks for joining with us live. I'm glad to have you on board. If I didn't name your city, I apologize. I just can't read them all. So, but a shout out to all of those locations and all those folks that are capturing us live. Good morning. You're listening to America's Voice Now. And we're going to cover 4 separate topics this morning, not the least of which is our first discussion. The other day there was a charge placed against a guy for killing a police officer who basically raided this guy's home with a no-knock warrant raid. And so as a result of that, this guy basically fired a weapon, and the police officer was killed. They charged him with capital murder. And interestingly enough, the jury determined that, no, sorry, it wasn't capital murder. In fact, it wasn't murder at all. They dismissed the charge. Rightly so, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. The question is it murder to defend yourself and your family? And I think the answer to that should be plain and clear to everyone. Is it murder to defend yourself and your family? And when we're talking about that, we're not talking about some burglar who breaks into your home to rob and steal from you, or to commit, injury to your family out of malevolence or violent intention to gain money or something. We're talking about against law enforcement, government. Is it murder to defend yourself and your family? Our second topic is going to be the vulnerable power grid. And the reason that we're going to hit on this topic this morning is because if you're not aware of it, over the course of the weekend and on Friday, there's been a lot of articles out there about the attack on the electric grid out in California, where an electrical power substation was fired on. One of the people that brought that to the public's awareness was Judge Jeanine on Fox News. I have to tell you, I watch her when I can, because I believe that she actually is one of the rare instances in the mainstream ministry of propaganda that is actually doing her job. She's exposing, without reservation, without apology, what's going on in our nation. And I like that. And frankly, I'm disappointed that she's the only one. Our third topic is going to be American apathy and how that is encouraged by government for the sake of dependency. When we talk about the fact that the Obamacare explosion, frankly, or implosion in our nation has changed everything about not only our economic outlook, but also our work ethic outlook. We're going to talk about Ellison. He's a representative. His name is Keith Ellison, in which he came out and made the amazingly he uttered the amazing statement that we're going to have parents being able to come home working reasonable hours. People are going to be able to retire. People might actually be able to cook dinner rather than have to order out and get some takeout because of Obamacare's laying off of 2.3 million jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, only in the most sick mind could that be construed as some level of rational behavior. I mean, you cannot justify what's being done here with an argument that, I mean, grasping at straws is what comes to mind when I hear a guy like Ellison open his mouth and utter that kind of diarrhea of the mouth. Verbal diarrhea. That's what it is. He's attempting to spin this news into something good, something positive for the nation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is only possible when gravity has left the building. You can go home now because it's over. There's no common sense. There's no reality left. There's no logic. There's no reason. There's no rationale. And there is no intelligence left in government. Our fourth topic is going to be the $1 trillion farm bill that is like the coffee, but different. This one is chock full of pork, not chock full of nuts. Of course, it's chock full of nuts as well, because that's what Congress is. Chock full of nuts. Shameful. Shameful behavior. Incomprehensible to me that they can pass a $1 trillion bill, 80% of which is part of the food stamp program, which has ballooned in 2000 from $17 billion a year to $80 billion a year. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, when you take a look at that kind of growth in a 13-year window, you'd think that the entire country has just ceased to work, which may not be too far from the truth. All right, let's tackle our first topic. I got to tell you, and for the record, let me just throw this stuff out there. If you want to communicate with us, you can do so. I encourage you to give me feedback about these programs. I want to hear your input, positive or negative. If you think I'm good, if you think I'm bad, if you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm on topic, if you think I'm off topic, if you think I've hit the nail on the head or completely missed it. Hits and misses are welcome. I may not necessarily agree with you, but I try to respond to all of those. I do not respond to chains, emails saying, look at this video, and this is what I think. I don't respond to that stuff. So don't send me that. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. Don't send me chain mails. I get some people that send me the same. They send me chain mail all the time. I don't want it. Please don't do yourself a favor and me a favor and don't do it. I don't have the time to look at it all. And I frankly give it zero credibility and credence. If you cannot express to me in your own words why this is important to you, then don't bother to send it to me because I don't get it and I'm not going to look at it. I'm also interested in hearing about stories that you'd like to see done. But don't send me an email and say, watch this and then do a story on it. You better express to me what the benefit is and why. If you can't use enough critical thinking skills to write down a paragraph about what your thoughts or impressions or beliefs are on an issue, then we don't have anything further to talk about. I know that sounds harsh to some people, but it's true. It has to be true because there's no other way that it makes sense for you to communicate with me and ask me to do something unless you can tell me why it's important. This is the same reason why you must use critical thinking skills to express yourself and to understand why you've arrived at the destination of your belief system, whatever that may be. If you have not accomplished that, then you really don't understand why you think that way. And if you don't understand why you think that way, you can never defend it. So trust me, it's an exercise that's worthwhile doing. All right, our first topic here. If you'd like to call the show, you're welcome to. 417-204-5141. That's 417-204-5141. You can dial in and you can have your input here. I just ask you to be succinct and clear and get straight to the point. If you'd like to listen to us on our listen line, you can listen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, totally free, 415-325-0725. That's 415-325-0725. When you call that number, you will literally get your own personal showing of the listening of the show. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, a Texas grand jury has refused to indict a guy from Texas on Wednesday when he shot and killed a police officer who entered his home serving a no-knock warrant, and it was listed as a no-knock warrant. So, basically, in December 19th, just before 6 o'clock in the morning now, remember, this is early in the morning. This is about 5:40 in the morning, right? This Burleson County Sergeant, Adam Souders, he led a team of investigators in a no-knock raid on a guy's home based on a statement from an informant who told the sheriff's department that this guy had somewhere between 10 and 12 marijuana plants in his home, and that there were rifles and a pistol which were in the home as well. And so they went to this guy's house. His name is Henry Goodrich McGee, and he was 28 years old, and it's 90 miles northwest of Houston, Texas area. So basically what they did is they went over it and they obtained a no-knock warrant from a judge. Now, a no-knock warrant means that they're not required to knock on the door and say, police are here. All they have to do is say, police, boom, and they break the door down as they're using the word police. So more often than not, most of the time, you don't even have an opportunity to hear the cry of police. They obtained this no-knock warrant on the grounds that if they were to knock, they would possibly, notify a dog, a guard dog, or that it would give this guy time to go and flush the evidence down the toilet. And their claim was that it would be, quote, dangerous, futile, or would inhibit the effective investigation. Now, for those of you who listen to this program routinely, you know that I am completely 100% dead set against the militarization of our local law enforcement, which is essentially what has got the nation trending in the wrong direction. So, here's the deal. This guy McGee, at 5:40 in the morning, hears strange noises inside of his home. Strange noises in his home in the morning. He thought he was being robbed. He reached for a gun, and he opened fire. They charged him with capital murder. Capital murder, because it was a police officer. The truth is, the jury looked at this and said, there's no way that this is capital murder. Quote, this is from his attorney. This was a terrible tragedy that a deputy sheriff was killed, which it is. But McGee believed that he and his pregnant girlfriend were being robbed. Now, the district attorney went out there and attempted to try to prove that this was capital murder and that he had done it in cold blood. And they argued that they did make an announcement prior to entering. But we all know how that works. You've seen enough of it on YouTube and television and what have you. Basically, they take a ram, a door ram, and as they pound the door in, they scream, police. So that word is usually simultaneously announced as the door is crashed open. Now, 9 times out of 10, the noise of them breaking down the door will generally cover up the cry of police. And if it's said through a door, it's highly unlikely you didn't hear it anyway. So they say that an announcement was made, but they can't prove it, and he can't prove that they did or didn't, and they can't prove they did or didn't. And so anyway, by the DA's own admission, a capital murder charge was pursued, knowing that they didn't really have the evidence that would be necessary to establish that kind of a case. I mean, capital murder is, that's as strong a murder charge as they have, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing more, and there is nothing stronger than capital murder except murder in the first degree, premeditated plan. That means, you've got notes about how you're going to do it, kind of thing, right? So essentially, the jury listened to all the evidence and said this was not capital murder. This guy was obviously attempting to protect his family and his home, as everyone has a right to do. Your Fourth Amendment reaffirms the commitment that and the God-given rights that you have, not government granted, but God-granted rights. Now remember, these are the rights that you have because you exist, not because someone in government has decreed that you have them, nor to be taken away by someone in government under the declaration that because they've granted them, they have the right to take them away. These are the rights that you have long before our Constitution was written, long before any written word existed, in fact. The right to be secure in your person, your house, your papers, and your effects against unreasonable search and seizure. Now, Texas also has what's often heard of as the castle doctrine. The castle doctrine is the doctrine that says the man has the right to defend his castle, right? We've all been familiarized with that by the old adage that a man is in charge of his castle. Well, he also has the right, as a result, to defend that castle. And truthfully, when you enter a home like that, I don't care whether you're wearing a badge or not, you are unlawfully entering a person's castle. And that individual has the right to defend himself and his family. All of this comes down to one thing, ladies and gentlemen. Our law enforcement agencies now believe that they have the right to kick in your door at any time for any reason, whether there's justification or not. And at this stage in the game, more often than not, more people are killed. And to be honest, I mean, express to me how it is that there's a need for force while people are, number one, sleeping, and two, over something as ridiculous as a couple of marijuana plants in a person's home. I don't care if there's marijuana plants in their home, and I don't even care if what you're telling me is that marijuana is illegal. What I'm telling you is that despite the fact that it's illegal, and despite the fact that it's not good for you, there's no justification to kick down a door at 5:40 in the morning and charge in there with weapons drawn and make an individual believe that they are under attack. They have a right to defend themselves. Now, this isn't the only recent instance of this kind of thing. One, it's happening more and more and more, and almost invariably, the odds are 90, 95, or 99 to 1 that the person killed is not law enforcement, but a resident. And I'll be honest with you, the number of incidents that have occurred of this in recent years, where it was an innocent person that was killed because they came out to defend themselves, is such a staggering number, they don't dare release that. I should actually try to go out and do a report on what the statistics are for that, because the numbers are unbelievable. But I can give you, Radley Balco's got a great blog out there about it. And we're talking about, wrong house, right? They get it, a statement from an informer, and they go to the wrong home, kick in a door. Grandpa comes out with the old double barrel, and boom, they blow him away. And then there's no prosecution for that. I respect and desire law enforcement in our community. I don't respect terrorism on the part of government. And if that's the way that they want to act, then you are justified in defending yourself and your family. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, our second topic is going to be this vulnerable power grid. We're going to talk about this because, guys, I got to tell you, what they did at this power grid in California is shot it up, and we're going to talk a little bit about the danger that that's posing to the entire nation and how for $2 billion Congress could fix it, and they refuse to do so. All right, make sure that you visit some of our sponsors and make sure that you let them know that you've heard about them on America's Voice Now. You can go to Mini Mart Express 1 and 2. Express 2 is located up on 14 and 63 in Old Granny's Cafe in West Plains. Outstanding location where they've got virtually anything you could want out of a Mini Mart. Cheapest fountain drinks in town. Ice-cold beer cave. They've got snacks and food and things like that as well. Make sure that you see either location. There's no liquor in the one that's down in the center of West Plains, right across the street from the city pool at People's Park, but certainly in the northern location. Our friends over at Battery Station at batterystation.com. You can find them there on the web. Their phone number is 417-257-7799. Kevin is a great man and a good friend, and I encourage you to please make sure that you visit him. All kinds of things that are not battery related, including tactical gear and freeze-dried food and ammunition and all kinds of stuff that you'd benefit from. Our friends at Pizza Hut, you can find them on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and they have a special for lunch every day where they have a salad bar and a pizza bar and a pasta bar. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's $5 lunch, a reduced lunch fee. And then on Tuesday evenings, it is family night where kids under 12 eat free. My friend Jason Henry, who is an attorney in the city of West Plains and in the state of Missouri and in the federal courts, and he's qualified for all three. So if you've got a case that is related to federal issues, if you've got a case that's related to state criminal cases, federal criminal cases, make sure that you give him a call. You can reach him at 417-256-4100. That's 417-256-4100. He specializes in firearms cases on federal and state levels, and then also handles domestics and civil cases, including personal injury, automobiles-related stuff. 417-256-4100. My friends over at the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, where you can find virtually anything and everything if you're into tobacco. And they also have all the accessories and I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of cigars and tobacco, pipe tobaccos and things like that. If you're planning a party or you're getting married this spring, make sure that you go and check them out because they also offer an opportunity for you to have your bachelor party there or a sports event or even a bachelorette party. So you can give them a call at 417-257-1776. You can also find, while you're there, slip into Wits End Classic Barbershop, get yourself a haircut. Wits End Classic Barbershop, you can reach them at 417-372-2027. It's 417-372-2027. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk about this topic of the power grid. And I think you'll understand at the end of this that we have been, that there is no excuse for Congress to delay on this issue. For a mere $2 billion, ladies and gentlemen, the rounding error on the Senate's lunch tab, we could solve this. And yet Congress will spend money on everything but this. All right. We return. Just on our last topic, our last news story, for the record, the Cato Institute, which is a kind of a conservative think tank organization, and they do a lot of good out there. I don't agree with them on everything, but I agree with them on plenty. They've come out with a statistic, and Balco writes for them in some measure too, and they've published some of his books. Radley Balco is his name. Their statement is that you are 8 times more likely to be killed by a law enforcement officer than you are by a terrorist. 8 times. Ladies and gentlemen, if that doesn't elicit the question in your mind of who's the real danger to America here, I don't know what does. I mean, here we are spending literally trillions of dollars, trillions, for government to, quote, keep us safe. And yet government itself is more likely by 8 times to kill you than are those terrorists that they shovel the fear into our graves while we're still alive. I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth. Here we are laying in a ditch they've dug for us, and they're throwing the dirt on top of us, all the while telling us they're keeping us safe. It's just absurd. All right, this topic for this segment is the vulnerable power grid. And the reason why I want to talk about this is, and I've talked to you about this before, you know, I've read a number of books recently about EMP-type events where, you know, if a nuclear weapon that's designated specifically for EMP were to be launched and detonated about 120 or 200 miles above the atmosphere, it would create an EMP effect that would, for all intents and purposes, turn America into a third world Stone Age country, because everything is electronically run, including this microphone and this everything you're listening to this on and everything else, right? And I know I have a loud and booming voice, but I don't think I'd be able to make it carry if I wasn't a thing like radio or internet. And so we don't realize, I don't think, how much we do rely upon electricity in our lives. I mean, everything that we do and everything, all of our production, all of our means of being able to produce, all of our jobs, all of our food preparation and food storage is based upon electricity. I mean, you can forget the fact that your iPad won't work. You could live without that, but you cannot live without refrigeration, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, not in this day and age. People don't know how to do that. And recently, well, it was actually not that recent. I mean, the fact is that we were kept from knowing about an attack in California's power grid. Now, so here's what happened. I think this was in April of 2013. That's a long time ago. And only now is the story coming out. And that raises a whole series of questions, too, like, why has this been kept from us? But here's what happened. Essentially, some people, and they're calling it a terrorist attack, those are in the know, the government and the power companies are saying it's vandalism, not terrorism. But you can be the judge of that after you hear the story. Essentially, they pried up a manhole cover, 2 manhole covers. These are, you know, those big, heavy 300-pounders, right? And they climbed down into these manholes, and they snipped the fiber optic cable lines from AT&T in order to keep alarms from being set off where they were going into these, where they were going in onto the property of this power thing. And essentially, they shut off all the ability for this power generation statement to alert the fact that it was under attack. And then they, within 40 or 50 yards away, fired over 100, I think it was either 120 or 150 rounds, and knocked out 17 different transformers with bullets. They were AK-47, which is a 7.62 by 39 round. And they essentially, when they shot these transformers, they leaked fluid on the ground. The fluid is flammable, and of course it caught fire. And they then left. It's interesting that there were a lot of signals. First of all the bullets were left behind, or all the shell casings were left behind. First of all, not a single one of them had a fingerprint on them, which is right off the bat, that's the mark of something other than, you know, Billy Bob and Clem, who decided to go out there after drinking a 6-pack of beer and shoot up that doggone box over there. Yeah. Secondarily, there were cairns, rock piles, left at different various places so that the individuals who were doing the shooting would know from where they could stage themselves, where 1, they wouldn't be invisible to cameras, and 2, they would be invisible to traffic on the highway behind them. Now, as a result, they knocked out these 17 transformers, and when these transformers were knocked out, it caused what would have been, had they not had some fast-thinking individuals in the utility companies employ, gotten together and shunted power from different locations and so forth, and started drawing in power from alternative locations to fill the void. But it would have caused a massive blackout that would have knocked out Silicon Valley. Now, listen, it's arguable whether or not that would actually be a good or a bad thing for America, but let's just assume, for argument's sake, that since Silicon Valley isn't only Google and Yahoo and AOL and Microsoft, there's a lot of people that would pay dearly to lose their power. And so the question is, they almost, first of all, why isn't Congress doing something about this? Secondly, it also begs the obvious question of what would it take to solve and fix this problem? Thirdly, it also brings to mind the question of who's responsible for this? Why haven't they caught anyone? Or is this the precursor to a false flag? Here's what happened. Or here's what you need to know. This is not what happened. Here's what you need to know. This issue has been raised with Congress repeatedly. Newt Gingrich, back in, the late 90s or something, or early 2000s, wrote the foreword for a book called 1 Second After, about an EMP attack like this. And the author of the book, his name is Fortune, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, but it doesn't matter. 1 Second After is the title of the book. And I've read it twice, actually. And it describes in pretty graphic detail the kind of results that we would expect as a nation, in a fictional environment, of course, what would happen were the power grid to be knocked out by an EMP. And in this case, the plot of the book says that, some unknown enemy, and you never really know who it is, launched one of these high altitude EMPs, detonated it above the atmosphere, and it knocked us back into the Stone Age. And the results, of course, are that people who rely upon electricity for survival, we're talking about people that are on breathing machines, we're talking about the elderly, we're talking about the infirm, the sick, the weak, the young, babies in incubators and hospitals, and people who are on dialysis, and people who are, vulnerable, died off immediately. People who were less vulnerable but less so died off within months. People who were, the vast majority of the obesity problem in America causes people to have heart attacks when you try to carry 2 5-gallon buckets of water from the creek up to the house, right? Let's get real, right? When you're talking about people who, don't walk for 100 yards for 25 years of their life, don't ever walk more than 100 yards for 25 years of their life, these people aren't going to make it. Not a week. And then we have the long-term people who are, on anti-rejection drugs and diabetics, and, there's just a host of other maladies that people are, that the supply of pharmaceuticals, which would immediately cease, right, would end. The upshot is simply this. Congress was given a copy of this book, and they were pleaded with to take some action to build build into our infrastructure the capability and the wherewithal to protect it from this exact kind of attack, and also the EMP effect attack. Now, that won't protect your home computer and your transistor radio and your Walkman and your iPod, but it would protect the grid and what have you. The point is that the price of doing this is estimated to be somewhere around $2 billion to protect the grid from these kinds of attacks here. Not necessarily the entire grid from EMP, but these kinds of terrorist attacks. $2 billion. Now, let's understand what $2 billion is. Congress just passed the $956 billion farm bill. So $2 billion, ladies and gentlemen, that's the equivalent of the rounding error on the Senate's catering bill. $2 billion is, they lost that an hour and a half ago. They can't even find it. And yet, they have done everything in their power to refuse these common sense, to use the president's favorite term, guidelines and corrective measures to put some protection into the system. They have absolutely adamantly refused. One of the reasons why is because the utility companies don't want the government to come in and force them to follow rules and regulations that they consider would be problematic in the sense that they would have to pay for them. Of course, you and I both know that they're never going to pay for it. They're going to pay for it up front, and then they're going to pass it on to you, and according to President Obama's necessarily skyrocketing electric bills. So who are we kidding here? I mean, what's the big deal anyway? Since they're not going to ultimately pay for it, and they're going to not only collect taxpayer money to do it, but then they're going to turn around and surcharge you on the back end and actually make money on the deal. I can't understand why our country is vulnerable to something like this. What it shows is a complete and utter rejection of Congress's obligation and duty to really, truly protect America. Not this faux TSA nonsense that we deal with at airports. Not the faux fusion centers, which are surveilling every American through cameras and microphones and streetlights. Not the faux NSA surveillance of every American so that they can find out where you go and what church you attend and who you talk to and when and how long and for what determined period, or what you're talking about on your email to your sister, or what porn site you visit. Not that kind of protection from ourselves. We're talking about protection from real terrorist attacks, whether they be domestic terrorists or foreign terrorists, and it doesn't make any difference because a terrorist is a terrorist, and I don't really care whether they hail from an American background or a Japanese background or a Muslim background or whether they are from Eastern Kazakhstan. A terrorist is a terrorist is a terrorist. And an action that would cause a disruption in the electrical grid system in the United States of America, resulting in the deaths of perhaps millions of Americans, would be an act of terror. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that Congress's unwillingness to fix this problem for a mere $2 billion is an act of terrorism. That's the conclusion I want you to understand. This is an act of terrorism by Congress and the utility companies against the American people. It is an act of willful, and intentional refusal to meet its obligation and its duty to protect us. Why? Because the utility companies have spent literally millions upon millions of dollars bribing, coercing, co-opting, and lobbying Congress not to institute something which won't even cost them a penny and, quite frankly, would dramatically improve the quality of their services, their infrastructure, and at no cost to them. In fact, just knowing the way that corporatocracy works in America, they'll make money on the deal. But Congress won't act. They've been given unprecedented evidence, supporting documentation, and empirical proof of not only what is the problem, but moreover, and perhaps even more importantly, how inexpensive and simple and short term. It's a one-time fix, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't something that has to be done once a month. Going in and protecting the grid is something that is a one-time event. And frankly, I don't care whether it costs $10 billion. I don't care whether it costs $100 billion. Take the Department of Education and shut it down for a year, and take the $100 billion they're using and get this solved. Now, for the record, the Department of Energy, another administrative agency which is extra-constitutional by its existence and nature, because it has no constitutional right to exist, has a budget that I believe is about $70 billion a year. And to shunt $2 billion out of that and focus on solving this problem instead of giving it away to Obama's donors is just inconceivable to me and unconscionable behavior. I mean, it's inexcusable that would be the case. There's no excuse for what's happening right now. None whatsoever. And the fact that Congress is failing to do so goes beyond irresponsible. It actually goes to the edge of the term treason. Not in the sense that they're aiding and abetting the enemy, although an argument could be made the fact that since they refuse to take the corrective action that would aid and abet the enemy, ultimately, they are, in a roundabout way, aiding and abetting the enemy. But because they are criminally malfeasant in their responsibility to protect and defend this nation from both domestic and foreign acts of terror. It's undeniable that we can afford this because all we got to do is stop some other program that's in a complete and utter waste of money. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, they just approved a $70 or $956 billion package for food stamps and the Farm Bill. Are you trying to tell me we can't squeeze $2 billion somewhere? And for the record, let me just make this perfectly clear. If you take it out of the pensions of more military people, you need to be charged criminally for that action, Congress. You see, the amount of money that we spend in this nation for the most ridiculously idiotic things, and we're going to cover that in the fourth segment, which is a $1 trillion farm bill chock full of pork. I mean, folks, we're spending the money on the most ridiculous things. The simple truth is, this attack is an example, and there are those, by the way, who are actually being intellectually and realistically honest about this, that are saying this was more than likely a dry run to determine how vulnerable the system is and how much greater action could be taken to bring down the grid. And when I say that, I'm talking about, what was done here. And by the way, these guys spent 40 minutes firing into these transformers. And the vice president of PG&E, who's now retired, a guy named Mark Johnson, is calling it a dress rehearsal. So in other words, think about a coordinated attack that would be on, let's say, 20 of these types of facilities, not just one, because with one they were able to reroute the power from other locations. But if you were to hit 20 of these in a grid, you would be able to literally knock out the power to the whole western half of the country, folks. Not just Silicon Valley, not just California, but I mean, this could have a ripple effect that would roll all the way across the country. And here's what you don't understand. These transformers have to come, because we don't make them here in the United States anymore. GE and the other companies who manufacture these have moved those jobs overseas. And it would take months to replace them. And in addition to the fact that it would take months to replace them, it would take perhaps upwards of a year to get them over here and then move them into place. Because guess what? If you don't have power, how are you going to move a piece of material that is bigger than a house and weighs 10 times as much? They're saying that the only reason, and this was done in the spring now, April of 2013, so it's a year off. It happened a year ago. They didn't say anything about it. There's been no public discussion about it. The argument that they made is that, we kept it quiet because we didn't want copycats. That's a lie. If you believe that propaganda, you are far more gullible than I'm giving you credit for. That's a lie. They're not doing this. They didn't keep this silent because they were concerned about copycat examples of this thing. What they were really worried about was the fact that America would recognize, one, how vulnerable we are, and two, that the likelihood would arise that we would recognize that Congress is operating and acting openly treasonously by not protecting us, by not doing their required duty. That's all government's really for. It's not to sit there and make sure that your friends who got you into office are well situated financially. It's not to take care of your donors. It's not to make political payoffs and paybacks. It's not to get rich at the expense of the largesse of the taxpayer. It's to protect the nation and the individual. And when government cannot do that, it has proven itself to be valueless to us. Now, I believe that we need government. I'm not an anarchist by any stretch of the imagination. But I am going to tell you this. If this government believes that a $2 billion expenditure one time, like a $5 billion expenditure on the immigration border, is not worth it, then what we must conclude is that Congress is not worth it. And therefore, I make a call that everyone in Congress resign, because not a single one of them, in the years that they've had of notice and knowledge and information about this subject, has moved one iota to fix the problem. Massive civil, peaceful disobedience is about where we are, folks. Because without that, you can be assured that our nation is coming apart at the seams. I got to tell you, this is some dangerous stuff here. You're talking about the ability to put the entire nation to sleep, which would make us vulnerable to not only domestic attacks, but foreign attacks as well. By foreign nations like, China, Russia, those guys. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Thank you for our sponsors and our friends over at the battery station. You can find them on the web by jumping onto their website, www.batterystation.com. Make sure that you visit those folks. Make sure that when you do go to visit our sponsors, you let them know that you appreciate the fact that they've been supporting AVN as well, because, well, quite frankly, that's how we stay on the air. That's what pays the bills, and even though radio is free, the cost to you is commercials and listening to them. Our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2, located in the city of West Plains. Make sure that you visit those guys. They're on 14 and 63 in Old Granny's Cafe, or directly across the street from the city pool in People's Park. And make sure that you visit our friends over at Pizza Hut. They have a number of different locations within our broadcast area and around the country, but this particular Pizza Hut, make sure that they sponsor and support us. You can find them on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, where they have a lunch special that runs every day of the week. Tuesday night, kids under 12 eat free, and Tuesdays and Thursdays, they have a special reduced lunch price. I believe it's a $5 day, they call it. Make sure that you see Jason Henry. If you have a federal or a civil case that needs dealing with, either state or federal or criminal, federal or state case of either civil or criminal need that needs being dealt with, you can call him at 417-256-4100. 417-256-4100. Our friends at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, make sure that you visit them, and you can find everything for smoking and accessories and pipes and tobacco and cigars and what have you there. 417-257-1776. They also ship. Make sure that you see our friends at Wits End Classic Barbershop. You can also call them, 417-372-2027. Jason cuts my hair. He does a good job. $10, folks. You can't beat that with a lead pipe. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice Now. When we come back, we're going to talk about the apathy that government is encouraging for the benefit and the sake of dependency. Hang on.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. For the record, by the way, those of you who capture us and find us either streaming audio or video on Patriot FB this morning, they are doing a massive server upgrade. And so if for any reason you are normally a visitor on Patriot FB, and I encourage you to get off Facebook and join on Patriot FB, they're down this morning, but they should be up shortly. If you capture us live on our website, that's great to see you guys on there. I see probably, I don't know, I'm guessing here we're looking at 80 or some odd people here. I see cities and towns all over. Clarksville, Yellville, I think that's Yellville, Arkansas. I should probably live in Yellville, Arkansas, because I have that voice that just kind of carries even when I'm trying to whisper. I see folks up there in Baltimore. I see folks down in Florida. I see them in Chicago. I see them in New Jersey, my old stomping ground. In fact, I'm watching Sparta. Hi, Chris. So you're welcome to join us live on our website every morning. We do stream it live on AVN, but we also stream it in addition to that on the Spreaker podcast service, and that's spread across, I don't know, a bunch of different websites, including Patriot FB. I strongly encourage you to participate with Patriot FB because it gets you off of Facebook, where there's no censorship and there's no trolls over there. So join on there. One of the reasons why Patriot FB is off the air this morning is the growing pains. It's amazing how fast that site has been growing. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you join patriotfb.com. You can also find us, of course, at AVN or on americasvoicenow.org. Please make sure that you contact me about different programs that we're talking about here. I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear your input and your ideas. You can email me at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. And join with us every day and give me your positives and your negatives. If you think I'm on track with a story, tell me so. If you think I've completely missed the ball, tell me that also. It's important for us to know that. If you have an opportunity, please go to our Spreaker page and click the like button. We just started using that podcasting facility, and once we hit a specific number of prescribed subscribers, they will put us up onto iHeartRadio, and we can dramatically improve our geographic footprint and our radio footprint. So help us out in that regard. All you got to do is go to Spreaker.com/user/America's Voice Now. And you can also download their web application directly into your phone and utilize that and listen to the program live anytime you want. You can also call our listen line, which gives you 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can always listen to the latest program. This one will be live right after we finish at 415-325-0725. Okay, so interestingly enough, Rep. Keith Ellison, and some of you know who I'm talking about with this guy, he came out the other day and tried to explain that because the Obamacare legislation has created, according to the Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO, right, who everyone touts as, the only real true measure of nonpartisan objectivity in government, until they don't like it. Until they don't like what the CBO has to say. Then, of course, they decry them and throw them under the bus, which is completely absurd. But in this case, the CBO came out and said, look, this Obamacare situation is going to create a loss of roughly 2.3 million jobs because of the fact that companies are cutting back on their labor force to get underneath the 50, and then those that are over the 50 are still trimming their losses and so forth and so on. And, Reid and Pelosi and others have come out and tried to actually make the argument that this is a good thing for America. Now, Ellison came out and really kind of showed his true colors here, because he's basically saying that this is a great opportunity for America. Only in the Orwellian doublespeak of government could you get somebody who would say a loss of 2.3 million jobs when already, by the way, we have 91 million Americans out of work is a positive thing, because people are no longer job locked. I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen, that's the term they're using. You're now free to not work. You're not hostage to a job so that you have health insurance. Isn't that a good thing? We're going to have parents being able to come home, work reasonable hours, he says. People are going to be able to retire. Well, actually, at this point, 91 million people are already permanently retired, it appears. People might actually be able to cook dinner rather than have to order out and get some takeout, he says. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Ellison, we're all not making $192,000 a year as a representative of a district. And so the real question here is whether or not Americans who have seen a staggering decline in their incomes, coupled with the fact that many dual working households have lost one job, if not both, can afford even takeout or even to have the food to cook. Oh, that's right. You guys just passed the $970-some-odd billion farm bill that incorporates a new disastrous injection of funding into food stamps, jacking it from $17 billion in 2000 to $80 billion now. You see, folks, what this is really all about is the great dependency game. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. This crosses party boundaries. This crosses ideology. This crosses all of the lines. This is no longer a function of whether or not we are talking about one political belief or another. What this is really about is the desire by government to make you so solely and critically dependent upon them that nothing that you do or that they do will enable you to be free of their grasp. Their goal is to simply make you incapable of surviving without some level of government handout. Because this is really easy, guys. You don't have to be a philosophy major. You don't have to study human behavior. You don't have to be an epidemiologist and study physical biological effects. You don't have to have a psychology degree. You don't have to have a political science degree. You just have to recognize the basic rules of common sense. And that is, if you are dependent on something, you are easily controlled. It's that easy. If you become dependent upon something, and then that something is threatened to be taken away from you, you will capitulate and bend to whatever you are asked to bend to. If you are surviving on the government dole for food and unemployment, then quite honestly, you're in a position where you are dependent. And government wants that, because now you're not a master of your own destiny. Now you are, for all intents and purposes, malleable. Malleable meaning you can be shaped, you can be molded. According to Cass Sunstein, you can be nudged. The nudge principle of Cass Sunstein is essentially this. You can take and bend social activity and behavior by government use of its police power. And in this case, food stamps and unemployment and all the rest of that does fall up underneath police power, because it's being taken from someone else and applied to redistribute through whatever means they determine that they want to essentially control you through. And whether that is, and all of these other agencies that are out there, they're there to control those that aren't controllable through the idea that through their stomach or their unemployment check or their bank book in some way, shape, and form. Who am I talking about there? Well, the EPA is out there to take control and manipulate those people that are not within the framework or the fringe of government control, in the sense that if you're not dependent on government for your food and your daily livelihood, and you're still not capitulating, or you're not a sycophant of government and an ideologue, then they can control you through other means, through the draconian administrative agencies like the FAA, the FCC, the DEA, the ATF, the EPA. Well, how can the EPA, why are you throwing them in there? Well, when you're a landowner and you want to utilize that land and either add to your business or build a home, and the EPA steps in and has controlling power over you, ladies and gentlemen, you see, what they're doing is they're leaving us with a false choice. Either become dependent or become oppressed. And that is where we essentially have fallen to. The United States is no longer in a position where we are independent of government. And we know, no one who's objective or intellectually honest or critically thinking can really believe for a moment that we control government any longer. You know, the Postal Service has a series of stamps. They're called Made in America, Building a Nation. And this is a collection that shows photographs of 20th century industry greats, men and women, building things like infrastructure, railroads and highways and skyscrapers and factories and so forth and so on. And they quote Helen Keller in there. And the quote that they use is, "The world is moved along, not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker." In other words, it's not just the mighty titans of industry that move the nation forward. It's the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions of workers who constantly, all lend their weight and their push and their strength to moving the nation forward. The truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, that if you look at the numbers in the United States right now, and you are to, and these numbers are always available for you. You can simply go to usdebtclock.org. It's very quick and easy, and you can see a bunch of startling information there. But the official number of unemployed is 10 million people. The actual number of unemployed is 19 million people. And the total number of the U.S. workforce is only 145 million. And the total people who are not in the labor force, now this is the people who are unemployed both officially and unofficially, and the people who have quit looking, is 91.7 million. And that number is about to jump from 91.7 to 94 million. We are almost at the point where we have, we're already past the point where we have tipped the scales now in favor of the non-working versus the working. In other words, if there's actually 145 million in the workforce, right? This is the total civilian non-farm labor workforce. They don't count farm because that incorporates the uncountable illegals. But when you talk about those who are not in the workforce, these are those who are neither employed nor unemployed. This category includes retireds, students, those who take care of children or other family members, and those who are not working nor seeking work because they've quit. Guys, the scales have tipped. We have more people at this point not working than working. We have passed the point where it's now 51% of the country is relying on 49% to keep them alive. And this is directly related to government's desire to force us into dependency upon them. Once we are wholly dependent upon them, then all your concepts of self-governance and self-reliance and independence are for naught. Because the vast majority can be so easily swayed that it's impossible for you to be able to operate as an individual who chooses self-governance, self-reliance, self-determination. You know, I don't care how strong an individual you are. If so much of the country is moving against independence, then it's almost impossible to swim against that tide. Our debt is out of control. Our government and those who are charged with defending, protecting, and defending and protecting the nation predominantly, that's their role, have completely abdicated that responsibility. And they allow this president to, and this is their words, not mine, operate lawlessly. Even his own party members are saying that, folks. And they won't do anything. That's because they also are dependent. They are dependent on what they can receive as benefits, both personal and familial and corporately, from government, from their lobbyists who bribe them. And that, let's be honest, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, folks, but when government is being paid by lobbyists, it's bribery to pass legislation. That's what it really comes down to. They have, like Judas, decided that they're going to sell the country out for 30 pieces of silver or less. At some point, this is going to catch up with us. It's already caught up with us. And the truth of the matter is, if the Ministry of Propaganda, the mainstream media out there, was willing to tell us the true nature of our exigent danger, at least those who are awake and aware, maybe not quite terrified yet, would recognize how far down we have fallen, how close we are to complete and utter disaster. Our economy is literally on the point of collapse. And I got to tell you, the bubble is not just in the United States. The Eurozone is on the edge of collapse. China, who everyone regards to be so stable, they've got a $23 trillion problem. You think our debt is high? They've got a bubble that is higher than our debt, higher than our GDP. You know, even if the best of intentions are applied here, ladies and gentlemen, it only takes one slip for the entire thing to go awry. One bad move by one person, even with the best of intentions, can cause the entire teepee of carefully aligned sticks to collapse. I got to ask you, where are you going to go from there? This government is completely malfeasant because those things which it's obligated to do, it won't do, and those things which it's not even supposed to be doing is what it cleaves to and adheres to. Your dependency is determined by them. They want you dependent. They want you to have to turn to them for every aspect of survival. Your food, your housing, your job. You know how many folks work in government? We have an entire workforce, that is, for all intents and purposes, 25 million. That's 1 in every 5 jobs. 1 in every 5 jobs is a government job. That should tell you volumes. Think about that for a minute. 1 in every 5 people works for government. And we're not counting now those who actually work for industries that exist solely on government, right? In other words, the manufacturers who produce, military stuff or whatever the case may be. We're talking about direct government employees. And I apologize. Actually, I think that number is probably realistically somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 5. But for argument's sake, let's call it 1 in 6. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. If you then incorporate everyone who works for government in an industry that wouldn't exist without government, holy smoke, folks, we're talking about a third of the country is dependent upon government for its day-to-day job. Then we're talking about half the country that is dependent upon government for its food and its housing. And now they want to take whatever's left and under Obamacare make us completely dependent upon government for all of our health care. And that way they pick up all the few pockets out there that have avoided it. It's actually quite tragic. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this $1 trillion farm bill, how it is, to use the old adage, chock full of pork, or chock full of pork. That was the name of a famous coffee. It used to be called chock full of nuts, and that's actually Congress. The bill itself is chock full of pork. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the examples of that, because it's actually quite frightening how much money that they are throwing at this thing. All right, let me throw out a couple of names here real quick. Make sure that you see the law offices of Jason Henry. If you have a criminal case or a civil matter that needs to be dealt with, you can find him at 417-256-4100. He is an attorney who handles both state and federal cases for criminal and civil issues. Also handles divorces and DUIs and all the normal nickel and dime stuff. But make sure that you give him a call either way, even if you may consider DUI nickel and dime, but it isn't when you lose your license, because then you lose your ability to function and work. 417-256-4100. You can also, while you're on the square or in town, you can visit the folks over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco. You can reach them at 417-257-1776 and go slip into Wits End Classic Barbershop, get yourself shaving a haircut. It's a little bit more than 2 bits these days, but you can still get a haircut for $10. And he does that old straight razor, hot lather shave with the towel and the whole 9 yards. So treat your guy or your boyfriend or your husband or your significant other to a nice, unusual shave. Make sure that you see our friends over at the Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. Both of those locations offer outstanding, the lowest prices on fountain drinks you can find, 39 cents and up. They also carry the Vapor e-cigarettes, and they're both tobacco places, so you can buy your cigarettes. The cheapest price on cigarettes in the carton, 100% guaranteed prices, and they carry the vaporizer liquids too. If you're into that, they can be found at 14 and 63 in Old Granny's Cafe on the north, and down across from the City Pool on the south. And then, last but not least, our friends over at Pizza Hut. Make sure that you swing in there and get a lunch special, salad bar and pizza bar. And kids eat free on Tuesday night under family night. And then in addition to that, our friends over at Battery Station. Make sure that you visit them. The Battery Station is at batterystation.com. They're located at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. And you can also call them at 417-257-7799. If you're interested in having a website developed or built, please contact airbridgeweb.com. That's air like air you breathe, bridge like a bridge you drive over, web like interweb. Airbridgeweb.com. You can take a look at some samples of some of the work that those folks do. You can also call them at 417-204-4064, 417-204-4064, and they'll make sure to provide you with a quote where you can get your own website, e-learning proposal done, and make sure that you get a chance to expand your business. We'll be right back. Are back. The Farm Bill has just been signed. The president signed it. You got to wonder what would possess Congress to approve this kind of spending in a day when we're sitting here talking about the complete and utter destruction of our economy from a job perspective, from a taxation perspective, from an international competition perspective. I mean, we're losing jobs, we're bleeding jobs. From a triage perspective, folks, this is the equivalent of of having your legs blown off in an accident and you're bleeding out. And instead of tying shut and tourniqueting the leg, they're sitting here literally playing games with us. I mean, I don't understand it. And I don't think you do either. In fact, I know they don't understand it. The only way to justify their action is when you look at the reality of the scenario that they are paying back their corporate masters. This is a corporatocracy we live in. And a corporatocracy always ends in one thing: a police state of fascistic mannerisms. What are the criteria for fascism? Well, fascism is a merger of corporate interests and government. When corporations can buy government to get government to act as their personal police force to enforce their mandates and their agenda, then government is no longer representing the people, but is now representing their employer. They have become mercenaries. Mercenaries. In this unbelievably wasteful and fraudulent bill is a $3 million plan for Christmas tree taxes so that they can advertise Christmas trees. Personally, I don't think Christmas trees need advertising. I think that most people already know what they are and buy them around Christmas time. I mean, it's a tradition that, is pretty thoroughly ingrained in the American scene. I don't think we need to spend $3 million in a tax, no less, so that government can direct that money to go to their favorite crony. The vast majority of the bill, 80% of it, is food stamps. 80% is food stamps, ladies and gentlemen. Food stamps is now up to $78 billion a year. From 17 a mere 13 years ago. $78 billion a year. Now, for the record, in that earlier segment when we talked about the vulnerable power grid, we discussed the fact that it would only cost $2 billion to protect the nation from a terrorist attack on our power grid. $2 billion. And Congress has been sitting on that for decades now and will not do it. And when you think about that, and from the perspective of what their real duties and obligations are, that's called malfeasance in government. And it really is. It's malfeasant. It's criminally malfeasant. If you had, if the military were to act like this, you would be calling for those particular generals to be not only removed from office, but charged. There's a $15 million wool trust fund. Wool. $1 billion a year for the next 10 years to sugar barons so that they can continue to monopolize the market and to keep out overseas competitors. If that's not counterintuitive to the obesity problem in the United States and all of the political claims to need to fix that, then I don't know what is. Sugar is pretty much universally recognized to be dangerous for us for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is weight gain, but also because sugar is what feeds cancer, and we have an epidemic of cancer in this nation. And yet, the government is going to spend $1 billion a year with the supporters of the administration to make sure that they have a monopolistic lock on the sugar market. I mean, $1 billion a year, and yet they refuse to solve the electrical terrorist grid problem for $2 billion. Just two. That's the rounding error in the lunch bill. That is such a small amount of money that it's not even worthy of mention. $1 million to buy weather radios for rural America. $100 million to study how to get Americans to buy more maple syrup. $100 million. When you look at that kind of waste and fraud, and it is fraud, this is not waste, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to start using some different words and some different language. You hear the term waste, fraud, and abuse. None of this is waste, and none of this is abuse. It is all criminal fraud. Criminal fraud. The reason is because they know that this money is being misused, and it's not waste. The government doesn't produce anything. All it does is take from you and redistribute. And it redistributes to its own cronies. We know that the average period in time that a home sits on the market in Washington, D.C., in the commutable radius of Washington, is 9 days. 9. Come on, folks. 9 days in this real estate market? I know folks that have had their homes on the market for 900 days and can't get an offer. 900. And the average home in the nation sits on the market for 9 days. Or the average, not in the nation, but in that radius of DC, drivable DC. Commutable DC. Washington, D.C. has replaced Hollywood and New York as the highest per capita job market in the country. Because the money is going to all of these lobbyists and all of these bottom feeders, the ticks, if you will, that now outweigh the dog. The dog is being bled to death. That would be us. Woof. We are being bled to death by a government that is 100% out of control and doesn't really show, any signs of stopping. I mean, here the Congress is, 6 months, not even, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, they were screaming bloody murder about how, under the idea that a government shutdown, the Republicans were destroying the nation and the Democrats were spending us into oblivion. And then the same Congress turns around 4 months later and passes a $1 trillion farm bill. They're going to spend $200 million on, quote, market access programs. That's what they call it. It's a euphemism for companies like Fruit of the Loom and McDonald's. And you know what they do with that money? They run television commercials. Now, with all due respect, is it the taxpayer's responsibility to pay for McDonald's and Fruit of the Loom to advertise? I mean, justify that in any way. It's like CIDs. You don't know what a CID is? Maybe you don't have them in your community. Maybe they call them something different. CID is, here in Missouri, is where they take a small location or geographic area and they say, we're going to apply a special tax here so that if you shop here, your money, there's a special tax that's on top of whatever it is that you spend here. And that money gets used by that property owner for the improvement of that property. It's kind of a twist on the idea of eminent domain without actually taking the property from the owner. It's the other way around. It's the owner getting a special tax incentive to improve their property paid for by the shoppers in the area. This is similar. Why are we paying for McDonald's to run television commercials? I mean, according to Michelle Obama, it's one of the worst foods you can eat. Isn't it? So if we've got an epidemic of obesity and we have a very, very poor quality product coming out from McDonald's, that even McDonald's, by the way, warns its own employees not to eat because it's not healthy, then you got to ask yourself the obvious question. Why are we spending $200 million to advertise their products at taxpayer expense? We spent $844,000 to sell grape juice for Welch's, but outside the United States. Yes, you heard me right. $844,000 that Welch's benefited from, not for selling grape juice here in the United States, but to sell it outside the United States. Listen, folks, we've gotten to the point where we have virtually no accountability in any way, shape, or form left. And I got to tell you, this isn't an option for us anymore. 2014 elections are coming. And there is no way that at this stage in the game, we can believe that we can realistically turn this around in a political vote situation. We can't. We cannot. First of all, only 1/3 of the Senate gets changed. And even if we were to take over the Senate, you'd still have to contend with the tyrant and the traitor in chief. Secondarily, there's no expectation that Congress, whether Senate or House, is actually going to do any good for the country. Because we put Tea Party people in there in 2010, and they went in there promising they were going to do the right thing, and then they completely failed. They failed to stand and hold against the line, the onslaught. They have, in many cases, become corrupted by that which they went in to fight. I'm not saying every one of them. I know that there's people who are going to take offense at that. They're going to say, not my legislator. My legislator did it right. Well, you can say that. I disagree. But I'm not saying everybody's in Washington is corrupt. I'm saying that if I were to use the old adage of the Old Testament and ask, is there 100 righteous men that I can find in Congress? The answer would be absolutely unequivocally no. Is there 50 righteous servants in Congress? And the answer is no. Are there 25? No. Are there 12 and a half? No. Are there 6? Maybe. Out of 535, we'd be lucky to find 6 that are worthy of keeping. And what that tells me is that it's not just the Obama administration, because this Congress is obviously complicit in dealing with, or complicit with him in what he's doing to the United States of America. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, when they come out and they say, this president is lawless, that should be resulting in the following statement: and we're going to impeach him or press charges or have him removed from office by the sergeant at arms. But we never hear that part. When you hear Rand Paul come out and say, this administration and this president have violated the law, the next statement should be, and I've instructed the sergeant at arms to place the president and the vice president under arrest. But we never hear that part. Why not? We never hear that part. Why not? Because they're complicit. Because they're a part of it. Do you think for a minute that any of the people who we traditionally attribute and classify as our founders would have stood idly by and allowed this nation to descend into where we are today? I mean, realistically, could you imagine George Washington or Madison sitting there on these sidelines and knowing that the president is operating outside the law and refusing to do something about it? Well, let me give you an example. When Adams, yes, John Adams, passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, Madison and Jefferson came out and said, this is an act of lawlessness. And at that time, they were not in a position of, they were not legislators at that point, other than for their own states. And so they went out and created the principle, the concept of nullification, which said, we may not be able to take you out of, I mean, they weren't in a position as members of Congress to remove the president. So what they did is they said, you can pass that law if you want in D.C., but in our state, here in Virginia or here in Kentucky, it's not applicable. That's a half measure at best. Nullification is a good thing, but it has to be used. And at this stage in the game, I don't think we have enough states using it or willing to use it. And we have the same problem with our own state legislators that we have with our Washington legislators. Most of them are no good either. Most of them are no good either. See, instead of being willing to stand up and do their duty, they've long ago capitulated to special interests and the bribery they receive from the same lobbyists that just spend more money in Washington. How do you rationalize and justify a conflict of interest on this scale? How? The truth is, after we've heard declarations like we've heard from the president's own party and his opposing party, and individuals within Congress, and individuals within the judicial system, one would imagine that the Supreme Court justice would come out and say, it's time to arrest the President of the United States and remove him from office physically so that he can do no further damage. But he doesn't. Why not? See, as the self-proclaimed final arbiter of the Constitution, if he can't do that job right, if the 9 black-robed drips in the Supreme Court of the United States will not follow the, and remember now, they have given themselves, under Marbury versus Madison, unilaterally given themselves, appointed themselves to be the final arbiters of the of the Constitution, which arguably every founder wrote against. Every one. And yet, for all that absconded power, they refuse to do that which is obligatory on them. They refuse to remove this president, his entourage, and quite frankly, the entire Congress from power, which tells me that they also are complicit. So now you have a Congress, and you have the legislative, you have the judicial, and you have the executive. And all of them are what? combining together for tyranny. The simple truth is, we no longer have three branches of government. Thomas Jefferson said to us, when all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Now, to put this into proper context, let's remember something here. In the days of the founders, they considered domestic and foreign to be foreign. Each state was considered to be foreign, right? When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks and balances provided of one government on another, the states versus the federal, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Wow. We're there. We are there. All right. We're going to wrap for the day. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Please feel free to visit us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you visit and see our friends over at Battery Station in West Plains, 417-257-7799. You can find them on batterystation.com. Make sure that you see our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop, where you can get yourself a great haircut for $10 right on the square in West Plains. And right behind there is the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop at 417-257-1776. If you'd like to call Wits End for their hours, you can reach them at 417-372-2027. Call the law offices of Jason Henry if you have any matter regarding legal issues that needs to be dealt with. You can reach him at 417-256-4100. Please make sure that you see our friends over at Pizza Hut, where you can get yourself a great pizza and salad combination every day for lunch. And then on Tuesday night, is family night, kids under 12 eat free. Please visit those folks on Porter Wagoner Boulevard and let them know that you heard about it at America's Voice Now. Visit our friends over, again, at Battery Station, 417-257-7799 and batterystation.com, and our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2 in West Plains. They have outstanding, cheapest fountain drinks that you can find. They are the guaranteed lowest prices on tobacco products, and they have snacks, chips, and things like that, and hot food in both locations. In the northern location, they have liquor and wine and ice-cold beer cave and things like that as well. So make sure that you visit those folks. One is on 14 and 63 in what used to be the old Granny's Cafe building. Everybody knows that. And at least everybody local. You know, if you're listening here and you're jumping in here from Baltimore, or you're in Alta Sierra, or you're here in Chicago, or you're here from Ives Estates, or you're from Chicago or Spokane, it's not going to help you much. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Please email me with your input, feedback, and other topics of discussion. You can contact me at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. Want to hear from you, good, bad, or otherwise. It's important for you to write and tell me what you think of the program and where we can improve. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.